Unrequited tides. In the fading light of autumn, Elias wandered the cobbled streets of his coastal town, where the sea whispered secrets to the weathered cliffs. At 64, he had become a creature of habit, his days measured by the rhythm of solitary walks and the quiet companionship of books. His home, a modest cottage perched on the hill, overlooked the harbor where fishing boats bobbed like forgotten dreams. The air carried the salt of the ocean, mingled with the faint decay of fallen leaves, a scent that stirred in him a vague unrest, as if time itself were unraveling at the edges. Elias had once been a schoolteacher, molding young minds with tales of ancient heroes and lost civilizations. Retirement had stripped him of that purpose, leaving him to grapple with the echoes of a life lived quietly, without the clamor of family or enduring romance. His wife had passed a decade earlier, not from illness but from the slow erosion of shared silences. Their marriage, a gentle alliance, had dissolved into mutual indifference long before her death. Now he found solace in the local library, a sanctuary of creaking shelves and muted lamplight, where the world outside seemed distant and unimportant. It was there, amid the musty tomes of poetry, that he first noticed her. Lydia was in her late 50s, a woman of quiet grace with silver-streaked hair that fell like moonlight over her shoulders. She volunteered at the library on Tuesdays and Thursdays, organizing the stacks with a precision that spoke of a life ordered against chaos. Elias had seen her before, of course, in the way one notices recurring figures in a small town, but it was on a rain-slicked afternoon that their paths truly crossed. He had reached for a volume of Rilke's elegies, his fingers brushing hers as she shelved it. "Pardon me," he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. She smiled, a fleeting curve of lips that lit her eyes like dawn breaking over the sea. "No harm done. Rilke's a favorite of mine. Those words cut deep, don't they?" Her voice was soft, laced with a warmth that made the room feel less shadowed. They spoke briefly of poetry, of how words could capture the ineffable ache of existence. Elias felt a stirring then, subtle as the tide's pull, a reminder that his heart, though weathered, was not yet stone. In the weeks that followed, he contrived reasons to visit the library more often. He borrowed books he had no intention of reading, lingering near the circulation desk where Lydia worked. Their conversations were brief, polite exchanges about the weather, the town's dwindling festivals, or the latest novel that had captured her interest. She spoke of her life in fragments: a daughter in the city, a husband long divorced, a garden she tended with the devotion of a painter to canvas. Elias listened, his responses measured, revealing little of himself. Yet in her presence, he felt a quiet unfolding, as if layers of isolation were peeling away. At night, alone in his cottage, he replayed their encounters like scenes from a half-remembered film. The way her laughter rippled softly when he shared a wry observation about aging, the faint scent of lavender that clung to her sweater, evoking memories of his mother's herb garden. He wondered at this late-blooming affection, so different from the passions of youth. In his 20s, love had been a tempest, all-consuming and reckless. Now it was a gentle current, deep and unhurried, carrying him toward shores he dared not name. He began to imagine a life intertwined with hers, not in grand gestures, but in the small intimacies of shared evenings. Reading aloud by the fire, walks along the cliff path where the wind tangled their words. He pictured her hand in his, warm against the chill of approaching winter. These fantasies were tender, laced with a melancholy born of experience. He knew the fragility of such dreams, how easily they shattered against reality. One crisp October morning, Elias mustered the courage to invite her for coffee at the harbor cafe. "Just a chat," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "To discuss that new collection of sonnets." Lydia hesitated, her eyes softening with what he hoped was regret. "I'd love to, Elias, but I'm afraid I have plans. Another time, perhaps." She touched his arm lightly, a gesture of kindness that pierced him like a thorn. He nodded, retreating into the stacks, where the books stood sentinel to his unspoken longing. That another time never came. Their interactions continued, but a subtle distance crept in. Her smiles polite, her conversations shorter. Elias observed her from afar, noting how she brightened when speaking to others. The young librarian with his easy charm, the elderly patrons who shared her love of gardening. He realized with a quiet pang that her warmth was not reserved for him. It was her nature, diffused like sunlight through clouds. In the solitude of his walks, Elias turned inward, examining this unrequited ache like a scholar poring over an ancient text. Why her? Why now? Age had taught him the folly of possession. Love, he mused, was not a claim but a quiet offering, often unreturned. He recalled a line from Rilke. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. Yet in the hush of evening, as the sea murmured below his window, he felt the weight of finality. His heart, once resilient, now bore the patina of years, scratched and dulled, but still capable of profound sorrow. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples, Elias sat on a bench overlooking the harbor. Lydia passed by, arm in arm with a man he recognized vaguely, a widower from the neighboring village. They laughed together, her head tilting toward his in easy familiarity. Elias averted his gaze, the scene etching itself into his memory like a sepia photograph. He did not resent her, how could he? She owed him nothing but the courtesy she had always extended. Rising slowly, his joints protesting the chill, he walked homeward. The wind carried the cry of gulls, a lament that mirrored his own. In his cottage, he lit a single lamp and opened the Rilke volume, reading until the words blurred. Love, he thought, was a solitary journey, even when shared. In its unrequited form, it demanded a deeper introspection, a reckoning with one's own depths, the uncharted territories of the soul. As winter approached, Elias continued his visits to the library, though less frequently. Their exchanges remained cordial, laced with the subtle undercurrent of what might have been. He cherished the ache, for it reminded him that life, even in its twilight, could still surprise with its capacity for feeling. In the quiet hours, he wrote letters he would never send, poems of longing addressed to the sea, to the stars, to the woman who had unknowingly rekindled his heart. And in that writing, he found a fragile peace, a testament to the enduring beauty of emotions unspoken. Unrequited Tides. A sequel. The winter that followed was unkind to Elias, its cold seeping into his bones as if the world itself mirrored his inward chill. At 65, he felt the weight of time more keenly, each step along the cliff path slower, each breath tinged with a faint labor of age. The coastal town, draped in frost and muted by fog, seemed to withdraw into itself, much like Elias. Yet the sea remained a constant, its restless churn a reminder that some things endured beyond human longing. He still visited the library, though his reasons had shifted. The books, once a pretext for seeing Lydia, now offered genuine solace. He read Chekhov and Hardy, their tales of quiet resignation resonating with his own. Lydia was still there on Tuesdays and Thursdays, her presence a soft glow in the corner of his vision. She greeted him with the same gentle smile, unaware of the shadow she cast over his heart. The widower, whose name Elias learned was Thomas, had become a fixture in her life, a companion for Sunday walks, a partner for the town's winter fair. Elias observed them with a detached curiosity, like a scientist noting the habits of a species he could not join. One February afternoon, as snow dusted the library windows, Elias lingered by the poetry section, his fingers tracing the spine of a worn Dickinson collection. Lydia approached, her arms laden with books to shelve. "Elias, you've been quiet lately," she said, her tone light but searching. "Everything all right?" He hesitated, caught off guard by her attention. "Just the winter," he replied, offering a half-smile. "It makes one introspective." She nodded, her eyes lingering on him a moment longer than necessary. "I know what you mean. The cold has a way of turning us inward." She paused, then added, "You should come to the reading circle next week. We're discussing frost. I think you'd have something to say." The invitation was casual, but it stirred something in Elias, a flicker of hope, fragile as a candle flame in a draught. He murmured his thanks, promising to consider it, and watched her return to her work. That night, in the dim glow of his cottage, he sat with a notebook, pen poised over blank pages. He wanted to write something for the reading circle, not a poem but a reflection, something to bridge the distance between himself and the world Lydia inhabited. But the words eluded him, slipping like sand through his fingers. The reading circle met in the library's back room, a cozy space warmed by a gas heater and lined with mismatched chairs. Elias arrived early, his nerves betraying his age with a faint tremor in his hands. The group was small: a retired nurse, a young teacher, a fisherman with a surprising fondness for verse, and Lydia, who led the discussion with an easy grace. Thomas was there too, sitting beside her, his presence a quiet claim Elias could not ignore. They read Frost's The Road Not Taken, and the conversation turned to choices and their lingering echoes. Elias listened, his thoughts drifting to paths he had not taken, to loves unspoken, to moments when courage faltered. When it was his turn to speak, he cleared his throat, his voice steady despite the weight in his chest. "Frost speaks of divergence," he said, "but I think it's the roads we don't choose that shape us most. They linger, not as regrets, but as shadows that teach us who we are." The room fell quiet, and Lydia's eyes met his, a flicker of recognition in their depths. "That's beautifully said, Elias," she murmured, and for a moment, he felt seen, not as the solitary man on the hill, but as someone whose inner life held weight. In the weeks that followed, Elias became a regular at the reading circle. He found a rhythm in these gatherings, a sense of belonging that softened the edges of his solitude. He spoke more, sharing insights honed by years of teaching and quiet reflection. Lydia listened, her responses thoughtful, and though their connection remained platonic, it deepened into a quiet camaraderie. He learned more of her life, her daughter's struggles in the city, her own fears of growing old alone, her love for the small rituals that tethered her to the world. He offered pieces of himself in return, stories of his teaching days, his wife's laughter before it faded, his habit of writing letters to the sea. One evening, as spring teased the air with hints of warmth, Elias found himself walking home beside Lydia after a reading circle session. Thomas had left early, called away by some errand, and the two of them moved slowly along the harbor path. The sky was a watercolor wash of pinks and golds, the sea calm beneath it. "You've been a gift to the group, Elias," Lydia said, her voice soft against the lapping waves. "You see things others miss." He felt a flush of warmth, tempered by the ache he still carried. "I've had years to practice looking," he replied, a wry edge to his tone. "Too much time alone, perhaps." She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Alone's not always a bad thing. But it's nice to share the view sometimes, isn't it?" He nodded, the words settling into him like stones in a riverbed. They parted at the fork in the path, her to her small house near the town square, him to his cottage on the hill. As he climbed the familiar steps, Elias felt a shift within him, not a resolution but an acceptance. His love for Lydia remained, a quiet ember that warmed without consuming. It was not the love of youth with its demands and certainties, but something gentler, content to exist without possession. In his cottage, Elias opened his notebook and began to write. Not a letter this time, but a story. A tale of a man who loved in silence, finding meaning not in reciprocation but in the act of loving itself. The words flowed, each sentence a small act of defiance against the winter's chill. As dawn broke over the sea, he set down his pen, the pages filled with a truth he had come to understand. That unrequited love, like the tide, was a force that shaped the shore without ever needing to claim it. Unrequited Tides, Part 3. The spring that followed brought a tentative warmth to the coastal town, as if the world were exhaling after the long hold of winter. Elias, now 66, felt the seasons shift in his joints, a loosening that mirrored the subtle thaw in his spirit. His cottage on the hill remained a sanctuary, its windows framing the sea's endless churn, but he spent less time alone now. The reading circle had become a tether, pulling him into the rhythm of shared voices and ideas. Yet Lydia, with her silver-streaked hair and quiet grace, remained the unspoken center of his orbit, a star he could neither reach nor cease to circle. The library was busier now, with children spilling in after school and tourists seeking refuge from the spring drizzle. Lydia's role had expanded. She organized poetry readings and book drives, her energy a quiet force that drew people together. Elias watched her from the edges, his presence steady but unobtrusive. Their conversations had grown richer, laced with a familiarity that felt like a gift. She shared stories of her daughter's new job, her own plans to plant dahlias, the way the town's history felt alive in its salt-worn stones. Elias offered his own fragments, memories of teaching boys who dreamed of ships, the way his wife's garden had withered after her death, his habit of walking the cliffs at dawn. One May evening, the reading circle gathered to discuss wolves to the lighthouse. The room hummed with debate over time and memory, and Elias found himself speaking more than usual. "It's the moments we don't grasp that linger," he said, his voice low but clear. "The ones we let slip, thinking there'll be another chance." Lydia looked at him, her eyes catching the lamplight, and nodded. "Yes," she said softly, "it's the spaces between that hold the weight." Afterward, as the group dispersed, Lydia lingered, straightening chairs. Elias hesitated, then offered to help. They worked in companionable silence, the clink of chairs against the floor a quiet counterpoint to the rain outside. "You've a way with words, Elias," she said, pausing to meet his gaze. "You should write them down, not just speak them." He smiled, a flicker of self-consciousness. "I do sometimes, but they're just for me. Letters to no one, mostly." Her expression softened, as if she sensed the weight behind his words. "Maybe one day you'll share them. I'd like to read what you see in the world." The suggestion stayed with him, a seed planted in fertile ground. That night, in the dim glow of his cottage, Elias opened his notebook and wrote, not a letter but a story. It was a tale of a man who walked the cliffs, carrying a love he could not speak, finding solace in the act of naming the world's beauty. The words came slowly, each one carved from the quiet ache within him. He wrote of the sea's ceaseless song, of a woman whose laughter was a lighthouse, guiding without promising a harbor. Summer arrived, painting the town in vibrant greens and golds. The reading circle moved outdoors, meeting under a canopy by the harbor, where gulls wheeled overhead and the air smelled of fish and salt. Thomas was often there, his arm brushing Lydia's, their ease a reminder of the life she had chosen. Elias no longer flinched at their closeness. He had come to see it as a fact of the world, like the tides or the stars. His love for Lydia had settled into something enduring, a quiet current that no longer demanded reciprocation. One humid August evening, after a discussion of Neruda's love sonnets, Lydia approached Elias as the group packed up. "I've been meaning to ask," she said, her voice hesitant. "Would you read something of yours at the next meeting? Something you've written? I think it would mean a lot to everyone." Elias felt his heart stutter, the weight of her request pressing against his carefully guarded solitude. "I'm not sure it's worth sharing," he said, his tone light but his eyes betraying his uncertainty. "It's worth it," she replied, her smile steady. "You see things, Elias. Let us see them too." The next week he stood before the group, his notebook trembling slightly in his hands. The harbor glittered beyond the canopy, and the air was thick with the promise of rain. He read his story, his voice steady despite the knot in his chest. It was a simple tale of a man who loved in silence, whose heart found peace in the act of loving, not in its return. The words flowed like the tide, gentle but inexorable, and when he finished, the group was silent, their faces soft with understanding. Lydia's eyes were bright, a sheen of tears catching the light. "That was beautiful," she said later, as they walked toward the cliff path. "It felt true." He nodded, unable to speak, the weight of her words settling into him. They paused where the path forked, her house to the left, his cottage to the right. The sea murmured below, a chorus to their quiet. "Thank you, Lydia," he said finally, "for seeing it." She touched his arm, a fleeting gesture that carried the warmth of their shared months. "Keep writing, Elias. The world needs your voice." As he climbed the hill to his cottage, the sky bruised with the first stars, Elias felt a lightness he hadn't known in years. His love for Lydia remained, a quiet flame that warmed without burning. But now it was joined by something new, a sense of purpose, born of words shared and understood. He sat at his desk, the notebook open before him, and began to write again. Not of love alone, but of the town, the sea, the lives that intertwined like threads in a tapestry. In the act of writing, he found a way to hold the world, to love it without needing to claim it, a truth as vast and enduring as the ocean below. Unrequited Tides, Part 4. Autumn returned to the coastal town with a quiet insistence, painting the cliffs in russet and gold, the air sharp with the promise of frost. Elias, now 67, felt the seasons turn as a deepening ache in his bones, a reminder of time's relentless march. Yet there was a steadiness in him, a resilience born of the past year's revelations. His cottage remained his haven, its walls lined with books and pages filled with his own words, stories and reflections that had begun to spill beyond the confines of his notebook. The sea below still spoke to him, its voice a constant companion, but now it carried a new cadence, one of purpose intertwined with longing. The reading circle had grown, drawing a small but devoted crowd to the harbor canopy, where they gathered weekly to share words and silences. Lydia remained its heart, her presence a quiet magnet that held the group together. She had a way of listening, her eyes bright with curiosity, that made each speaker feel their words mattered. Elias, once a silent observer, had become a pillar of the group. His stories and insights awaited with anticipation. His tale of the silent lover had sparked something in the others, a willingness to share their own unspoken truths. The fisherman spoke of his brother lost at sea. The retired nurse confessed her fear of fading into obscurity. Elias listened, his heart heavy with their trust, and felt a kinship he hadn't known he craved. Lydia and Thomas were a steady pair now, their bond evident in the ease of their gestures. His hand on her shoulder, her laughter at his quiet jests. Elias no longer flinched at their closeness. It had become a familiar ache, like the dull pain of an old injury. His love for Lydia had not dimmed, but it had transformed, settling into a quiet reverence that asked for nothing in return. He cherished their moments of connection, their walks along the harbor, their shared laughter over a misquoted line of poetry, knowing they were enough. One October afternoon, as the group discussed Austen's Persuasion, Lydia announced a new project, a collection of writings from the reading circle, to be printed and shared at the town's winter festival. "We all have stories," she said, her voice warm with conviction. "Let's make something lasting." The group buzzed with excitement, and Elias felt a stir of possibility. His stories, once private, might find a place in the world. That evening, he sat with Lydia at the library, sorting through submissions. The room was quiet, save for the rustle of pages and the distant hum of the sea. "You should lead the collection, Elias," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "You're writing, it's the thread that ties us together." He looked at her, surprised. "I'm no leader," he protested, his voice soft. "Just an old man with too many thoughts." She smiled, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "You're more than that. You see the world in a way that makes it bigger. People need that." Her words settled into him, heavy with meaning. Over the next weeks, Elias took on the task, editing the group's stories with care, weaving them into a tapestry of voices. He included his own, a new piece about a man who walked the cliffs, not seeking love but finding it in the world's small beauties. The glint of sunlight on water, the call of a gull, the weight of a friend's kind words. Writing it, he felt a release, as if he were setting his love for Lydia free, not to fade but to exist as part of something larger. The festival arrived in December, the town square aglow with lanterns and the scent of mulled wine. The Reading Circle's collection, a slim volume bound in navy cloth, was displayed on a table near the harbor. Elias stood beside it, his hands unsteady as townsfolk leafed through the pages. Lydia was there, her face bright with pride, Thomas at her side. "You did this," she said to Elias, gesturing to the crowd. "You gave us a voice." He shook his head, deflecting the praise. "We did it together." Later, as the festival wound down, Elias and Lydia walked to the cliff's edge, where the sea stretched dark and vast beneath a star-strewn sky. The wind was sharp, carrying the tang of salt and pine. "I read your story," Lydia said, her voice almost lost to the breeze. "The one about the man on the cliffs. It felt like you." Elias met her gaze, his heart a quiet drumbeat. "It is me," he said simply. "All the parts one couldn't say before." She nodded, her eyes holding his with a tenderness that felt like absolution. "I'm glad you said them now." They stood in silence, the sea's song filling the space between them. Elias felt no need to speak further. The moment was enough, a culmination of all the unspoken words he had carried. His love for Lydia, unrequited but enduring, had led him here, to a place where his heart's quiet ache had birthed something tangible, something shared. As he walked home, the stars bright above the hill, Elias thought of the years ahead. They would bring more winters, more aches, but also more stories. He would write them not for Lydia alone, but for the town, for the sea, for the fragile beauty of living. In his cottage, he opened his notebook, the blank page a canvas for what was to come. The sea whispered outside, and Elias began to write. His words a bridge between the heart's silent longings and the world's vast, unending tide. Unrequited Tides, Part 5. Winter descended on the coastal town with a fierce clarity, the air brittle and the sea a restless mirror of steel beneath a low sky. Elias, now 68, felt the cold more deeply, each gust along the cliff path a reminder of his body's slow surrender to time. Yet within him burned a quiet fire, kindled by the stories he had woven and the community that had embraced them. His cottage, once a solitary refuge, now held traces of a broader life. Letters from Reading Circle members, a second printing of their collection, a photograph of the group pinned to the wall, Lydia's smile at its center. The Reading Circle had become a cornerstone of the town, its gatherings spilling beyond the harbor canopy to the library's warmth when storms raged. Elias was no longer just a participant but a quiet leader. His stories the spark for others to share their own. The collection, titled Tides of Words, had sold out at the Winter Festival, and whispers of a regional literary prize stirred the group's pride. Lydia, ever the catalyst, planned a spring reading event, inviting neighboring towns to join. "We're building something," she told Elias one evening, her eyes alight. "Something that outlasts us." Her words echoed in him, stirring a mix of gratitude and melancholy. His love for Lydia remained, a steady pulse beneath his days, but it had woven itself into the fabric of his life rather than defining it. Thomas was a constant at her side, their bond a quiet certainty. Elias no longer measured his heart against theirs. He had found a peace in loving without needing to possess, in seeing her joy as a light that warmed him too. One February morning, as snow fell in soft curtains over the harbor, Elias received a letter. It was from a small press in the city, expressing interest in publishing a collection of his stories. Lydia had sent them Tides of Words without telling him, including a note about his singular voice. He sat at his kitchen table, the letter trembling in his hands, and felt a rush of disbelief. To be seen, to be read. It was a gift he hadn't dared imagine. He found Lydia at the library, shelving books with her usual care. "You didn't tell me," he said, holding up the letter, his voice thick with emotion. She smiled, unapologetic. "You wouldn't have done it yourself. Your words deserve to be out there, Elias." He looked at her, the woman who had unknowingly reshaped his twilight years, and felt a gratitude too vast for words. "Thank you," he said simply, the weight of it carrying all he couldn't say. The spring reading event arrived in April, the town square blooming with early flowers and the hum of voices from near and far. Elias stood before a crowd larger than he'd ever faced, his notebook worn but steady in his hands. He read a new story, one he'd written in the quiet of winter, a tale of a man who walked the cliffs, not to escape his heart's ache but to embrace it, finding in its unrequited depth a map to the world's beauty. The crowd listened, rapt, and when he finished, the applause was a tide that lifted him. Lydia found him afterward, her eyes bright with tears. "You've given us something extraordinary," she said, her voice soft against the chatter of the crowd. "I'm so proud of you." He met her gaze, seeing in her the friend she had become, the muse she would always be. "It started with you," he said, his voice steady. "You saw me when I couldn't see myself." She shook her head, her smile wistful. "You were always there, Elias. I just held up a mirror." They parted as the crowd swirled around them, Lydia returning to Thomas's side, Elias to the friends who now claimed him as their own. The sea glittered beyond the square, its song a constant undercurrent. Elias walked home alone, the stars emerging above the hill, and felt no loneliness. His love for Lydia had not faded, but it had become a quiet cornerstone, a foundation for the life he had built. In his cottage, he opened his notebook, now filled with stories that bore his name and the names of others. The small press had offered a contract, and he would sign it, sending his words into a world beyond the cliffs. But tonight, he wrote for himself, a final letter, not to the sea or the stars, but to the man he had been, the one who had walked alone with a silent heart. He thanked that man for his quiet endurance, for carrying the ache that had led to this moment. As dawn broke, painting the sea in hues of rose and gold, Elias set down his pen. The tide rolled in, eternal and unyielding, and he smiled. His love, unrequited yet boundless, had carved a path through the years, leading him to a truth as vast as the ocean, that to love was to live, and to live was to write, each word a ripple in the endless tide of being.